You can't keep a good man down, right? And this was a really, truly good man. And Peter shows the resurrection to be true in three ways: promise, witness, and experience. First of all, there was promise in verses 25 to 28. 1,000 years before Jesus came, David was around, King David, the one who killed the giant with the stone, remember, Goliath. 1,000 years before David. And in Psalm 16 and Psalm 110, he spoke about the coming Messiah, Jesus. David was not raised. His tomb was still in Jerusalem at that time. People could go visit it. And he did not ascend to heaven. But his great descendant, Jesus, did rise, and he did ascend to heaven. So David was speaking of Jesus in Psalm 16 and Psalm 110. Verse 31, for example, seeing what was to come, David spoke, not of himself, but of the resurrection of the Messiah, that he was not abandoned to the realm of the dead, nor did his body see decay. He was raised again. Promise, the promise of God in the Old Testament. Witness is the second strand of evidence for the resurrection. There was witness. It's a huge thing in Luke's gospel, Luke's earlier gospel and in Acts, that there were eyewitnesses of the things that happened. And Peter says in verse 33, we are all witnesses of it. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. There were witnesses. Peter and John and James and the others, they all saw Jesus alive again with their own eyes. And no one in Jerusalem could stand up and say, it's all a lie. They made it up. No one could produce the dead body of Jesus. No one could say the tomb was not empty. No one could challenge what Peter was claiming. The evidence was too good. So there was promise, the promise of God. There was witness, the witness of the disciples, the apostles, Peter, James, and John, and so on. But there's another strand of evidence to show that Jesus is really alive, and that was experience. There in verse 33, now we see the impact. Just want to bring that up for you. We see the impact as the Spirit is poured out on Peter and John and the rest. And Peter says that you can now see and hear it. Verse 33, exalted to the right hand of God, that's Jesus. He has received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and has poured out what you now see and hear. That's experience, what you see and hear. And those who were there in the crowd listening to Peter, seeing Peter, could see and hear the impact of the risen Jesus on Peter and John and the rest. This again was something that had been promised by the prophet Joel back in an earlier verse 16 in this chapter. But the point is that they could see and hear the impact. Because Christianity is meant to be something you see and hear. Faith is meant to be something that's not just private, locked up in your own heart, but makes a difference to your everyday life. And all the people listening could see and hear the impact of the risen Jesus who had poured out his Spirit down into the lives of his disciples, just as he promised. So promise, witness, and experience, all pointing to the reality that Jesus was alive. He had risen. These men, Peter and his friends, were so frightened before. Do you remember how they cowered in a locked room after the death of Jesus? But now here they are. They're full of courage because they're full of the Holy Spirit. No one could deny that change. They could see and hear it in front of them.